A child who hasn't spoken in 4 years does not suddenly whisper mama to a stranger, unless something inside her recognizes home. The crystal chandeliers above Hanseong Lounge cast warm gold across the private dining floor while Chicago's most feared Korean crime boss sat motionless at the center of a 12-seat table worth more than most people's yearly rent. Ethan Kong barely touched the glass of bourbon resting near his hand. Around him, wealthy investors laughed too loudly, politicians smiled too carefully, and men in tailored suits waited for his approval before speaking. But none of it held his attention tonight. His eyes remained fixed on the small girl seated beside him. 8-year-old Lily Kong stared blankly at the tablecloth, her tiny fingers folded quietly in her lap while the world moved around her like distant static. She hadn't spoken a single word in 4 years. Not after her mother died. Not after the endless therapists, specialists, luxury clinics, medications, and private schools designed for children with trauma. For 4 years, silence had wrapped around Lily like a wall no one could break. The only sounds she made now were soft breaths and the occasional frightened whimper in her sleep. Ethan had spent millions trying to bring his daughter back to him, but every attempt ended the same way. Empty eyes. Silence. Distance. Across the dining room, Amara Brooks balanced a heavy silver tray against one palm while weaving carefully between crowded tables. Her black uniform was perfectly pressed despite the 12-hour shift stretching across her exhausted body. Loose curls framed her face beneath the restaurant lights, and even after hours on her feet, she still moved with quiet grace. Most people in the room never looked directly at her. That was how places like this worked. Rich people saw servers the way they saw candles or expensive wallpaper. Present, but invisible. Table 12 needs another bottle, her manager whispered sharply while passing by. Amara nodded softly and continued walking toward Ethan Kang's table, unaware that tonight would divide her life into before and after. One of the investors suddenly burst into loud laughter. Beside Lily, slamming his hand against the table hard enough to rattle the crystal glasses. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. Lily flinched violently. Her tiny shoulders curled inward. Her breathing turned shallow. Ethan immediately leaned toward her, his cold expression tightening with concern. "Lily," he said quietly in Korean. "Look at me." But the girl's panic was already spreading. Her fingers covered her ears. Her breathing quickened into frightened gasps. 2 security guards exchanged worried looks near the wall while guests awkwardly fell silent around the table. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not here. Not tonight. Then Amara saw the child trembling. Without thinking, she slowly lowered the tray onto a nearby service stand and crouched several feet away from Lily instead of approaching directly. Her voice remained barely above a whisper. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently. "It's okay." Ethan's eyes snapped toward her instantly. Dangerous. Sharp. Protective. Every guard in the room stiffened. Nobody approached Lily Kong without permission. But Amara didn't seem to notice the tension flooding the room. She simply stayed low to the floor, giving the little girl space while softly humming an old lullaby under her breath. The melody floated quietly beneath the clinking glasses and distant piano music. Simple. Warm. Familiar. Lily's shaking slowly began to ease. Ethan stared at the waitress in disbelief while his daughter's breathing gradually steadied for the first time all evening. The little girl lowered her hands from her ears. Her wide dark eyes lifted slowly toward Amara's face. Something changed in Lily's expression then. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. As if some broken piece inside her had suddenly awakened. Amara gave her the smallest smile. "There you go," she whispered softly. "You're safe." Lily blinked once. Her lips trembled. Ethan leaned forward slightly, every muscle in his body going still. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared beneath the restaurant music, Lily Kong spoke her first word in 4 years. "Mama." The wine glass slipped from Ethan Kang's hand and shattered across the marble floor. The entire room went silent. No one at Hanseong Lounge moved for nearly 3 seconds after the little girl spoke. The silence felt unnatural inside a restaurant built for power and noise. Broken crystal glittered across the marble floor near Ethan Kang's polished shoes while expensive men sat frozen around the table, too stunned to breathe too loudly. Ethan did not blink. His dark eyes remained locked on his daughter as if he were afraid the moment would disappear if he moved too quickly. Lily sat perfectly still in her chair, her small fingers gripping the edge of the tablecloth while her wide eyes stayed fixed on Amara Brooks. The waitress looked just as shocked as everyone else. "Sir, I am so sorry," Amara whispered immediately, instinctively stepping backward. "I did not mean to interrupt." But Ethan barely heard her. 4 years. For endless years of silence shattered by one word spoken to a stranger holding a serving tray. Doctors in Manhattan had failed. Specialists flown in from Seoul had failed. Therapists with framed degrees and soft voices had failed. Yet somehow this exhausted waitress with tired eyes and sensible shoes had reached a place inside Lily no one else could touch. Ethan slowly stood from his chair. The movement alone shifted the entire room. Men who controlled million-dollar companies straightened immediately. Security near the walls subtly adjusted their posture. Ethan Kang was not a man people ignored. At 38 years old, he had built one of the most powerful private investment networks in Chicago while rumors followed him through every luxury hotel and boardroom in the city. People spoke his name carefully. Quietly. But none of those men had ever seen him look afraid before. And in this moment, fear sat clearly behind his eyes. Not fear of danger. Fear of hope. "What did you say to her?" Ethan asked quietly. Amara swallowed hard under the weight of his stare. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than from across the room. Sharp jawline. Expensive black suit tailored perfectly across broad shoulders. Dark hair brushed neatly away from a face carved by discipline and exhaustion. But his eyes were what unsettled her most. They did not look angry. They looked desperate. "Nothing, sir," Amara answered softly. "She was overwhelmed, so I just tried to calm her down." Ethan glanced at Lily again. "Lily." His voice gentled slightly. "Sweetheart, look at me." Slowly, the little girl turned toward her father. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Tears shimmered in Lily's eyes, but for the first time in years there was awareness behind them. Presence. She looked awake somehow. Ethan crouched beside her chair carefully, as if sudden movement might scare her away. "Can you say that again?" he asked quietly. Lily's gaze drifted back toward Amara standing a few feet away beneath the chandelier light. Her tiny lips parted slightly. But no sound came out this time. The moment vanished as quickly as it appeared. Ethan lowered his eyes for one brief second, disappointment flickering across his face before years of control sealed it away again. Around the room, nervous guests pretended not to watch. One investor cleared his throat awkwardly. Another reached for his drink with shaking fingers. Ethan slowly rose back to his full height. "Everyone leave," he said calmly. No one argued. Chairs scraped softly against marble as wealthy men rushed to gather jackets and phones. Within seconds the private dining floor emptied, leaving only security, Lily, Ethan, and Amara standing near the shattered glass. The pianist downstairs continued playing faintly beneath the silence upstairs. Ethan turned toward Victor Hale near the doorway. "Take Lily to the car." Victor nodded immediately and approached gently, but Lily suddenly grabbed the sleeve of Amara's uniform. The entire room froze again. The little girl's hands trembled slightly as she looked down at the floor. She would not let go. Ethan stared at his daughter's tiny fingers clutching the waitress like a lifeline. Then slowly, very slowly, he looked back at Amara Brooks. "What is your name?" he asked. "Amara, sir." Ethan nodded once. "You are coming with us." Chicago glittered outside the tinted windows of Ethan Kang's black Escalade like a city built entirely from cold light and expensive secrets. Rain streaked softly against the glass while downtown traffic reflected gold and red across the wet streets below. Inside the SUV, silence wrapped around everyone like tension pulled too tight. Victor Hale sat in the front passenger seat speaking quietly into an earpiece while two security vehicles followed behind them through midnight traffic. Ethan remained seated across from Amara with Lily beside him, but the little girl had not released Amara's hand once since leaving the restaurant. Even now, her tiny fingers curled tightly around the waitress's sleeve as if letting go might make her disappear. Amara sat stiffly against the leather seat, trying not to look overwhelmed by the kind of luxury she had only seen in movies. The interior alone probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Soft ambient lights glowed beneath polished wood panels while the scent of expensive cologne and leather filled the air. She still did not fully understand why she was here. Her manager had looked terrified when Ethan Kong escorted her out of Hanseong Lounge personally. "Sir," Amara said carefully after several minutes of silence, "I really should get home soon. My little brother is waiting for me." Ethan's eyes lifted toward her immediately. Sharp. Measuring. "How old is he?" 13. "You take care of him alone?" Amara hesitated slightly before nodding. "Mostly." Ethan studied her quietly. There was no judgment in his expression, only calculation. He had spent his entire adult life reading people. Investors. Rivals. Politicians. Liars. Yet the woman sitting across from him confused him more than anyone he had met in years. She did not seem impressed by wealth. She did not flirt. She did not ask questions. If anything, she looked frightened to even make eye contact with him. And still somehow Lily trusted her immediately. That alone made Ethan uneasy. Lily rested silently against Amara's side now, calmer than Ethan had seen her in months. Usually after public outings she shut down completely for hours, sometimes days. But tonight her breathing remained steady. Her shoulders relaxed. Every few minutes she glanced quietly toward Amara like a child checking whether someone safe was still nearby. Ethan looked away before the sight could affect him too much. Hope was dangerous. He learned that lesson 4 years ago inside a white hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and rainwater. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked suddenly. Amara blinked. "The lullaby?" Ethan nodded once. "My mother used to sing it," she answered softly. "When I was little." Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Your mother was Korean?" "No, sir. She was from Georgia." That answer only deepened the strange pressure building in his chest. Because the melody had been identical. Every note. Every pause. It was the same lullaby Lily's mother sang every night before her death. Ethan remembered standing outside his daughter's bedroom years ago listening to that exact melody drift softly beneath the door while his wife brushed Lily's hair beneath warm lamplight. He had not heard it since the funeral. "What was your mother's name?" Ethan asked quietly. "Celeste Brooks." Ethan stared at her for a second longer before slowly leaning back into the seat. No recognition. No connection. Just coincidence. It had to be coincidence. Yet something about tonight refused to feel ordinary. The SUV finally turned through massive iron gates overlooking Lake Michigan. Amara's eyes widened slightly as Ethan Kang's estate emerged through the rain like something from another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows glowed warmly behind stone walls while security lights reflected across perfectly trimmed gardens stretching nearly half an acre. The mansion looked less like a home and more like a place designed to keep the world out. As the vehicle rolled to a stop beneath the covered entrance, Victor turned around from the front seat. "We cleared the staff level," he said quietly. "Everyone is awake." Ethan nodded once before reaching for the door handle. But before he could move, Lily suddenly shifted closer to Amara and whispered something so softly Ethan almost missed it. "Do not go." The entire vehicle fell silent again. The rain intensified as Ethan Kong stepped out of the Escalade, cold droplets tapping softly against the black umbrella Victor opened over him within seconds. The mansion lights glowed across the wet stone driveway while security guards quietly moved into position near the entrance. But Ethan barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on the back seat where his daughter still clung to Amara Brooks with trembling fingers. "Do not go." The tiny whisper continued echoing inside his mind long after Lily spoke it. 4 words. That was already more than she had willingly said to anyone in months. Amara looked completely frozen beside her. "Sir," she said carefully, almost apologetically, "I do not think she means it like that. She is probably just overwhelmed." But Lily tightened her grip immediately, burying part of her face against Amara's sleeve. Ethan stared at the small movement in silence. Usually Lily avoided physical contact completely. Even therapists struggled to sit beside her without triggering panic. Yet tonight she leaned toward this woman naturally, instinctively, like a child reaching for warmth after years in the cold. Ethan finally spoke without looking away from his daughter. "You are staying for tea." It did not sound like a request. Amara hesitated. "My brother is home alone." Ethan turned slightly toward Victor. "Send a driver to her apartment." "Groceries too?" "Yes, sir." Amara blinked in surprise. "That is really not necessary." "I was not asking." His tone remained calm, but final. A few moments later, Amara followed Ethan and Lily through the enormous front doors into a mansion so quiet it almost felt unreal. Warm light spilled across polished marble floors while modern chandeliers glowed overhead like floating gold. The scent of cedarwood and expensive tea drifted through the air. Somewhere deeper in the house, soft classical piano music played through hidden speakers. Staff members immediately straightened the second Ethan entered. No one spoke above a whisper. Yet every pair of eyes shifted toward Amara with open confusion. Ethan Kong never brought strangers home. Especially not women from restaurants. Especially not after what happened to his wife. Lily still refused to release Amara's hand as they walked slowly through the massive foyer. Ethan noticed every stare from the staff and ignored them completely. "Prepare the east sitting room," he instructed quietly. "And cancel tomorrow morning's meetings." Several employees looked stunned but nodded immediately. Ethan had not cancelled a business meeting in years. Amara tried not to appear intimidated while stepping into the sitting room overlooking Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the dark water outside while a fire crackled softly inside a massive stone fireplace. Everything in the room looked untouched. Perfect. Expensive. Cold. It did not feel like a home where a child laughed. Lily climbed silently onto the cream-colored sofa beside Amara and stayed close enough that their shoulders touched lightly. Ethan remained standing near the fireplace watching them both with unreadable eyes. "Tea, sir?" a housekeeper asked quietly from the doorway. "Chamomile for Lily," Ethan answered automatically. Then after a brief pause, "And whatever Miss Brooks wants." "Hot chocolate," Amara said softly before she could stop herself. The room fell strangely quiet. Embarrassment warmed her face instantly. "Sorry. I know that sounds childish." But for the first time that night, something almost human flickered across Ethan Kang's face. Not amusement exactly. More like memory. "My wife used to order hot chocolate in 5-star hotels," he said quietly. "She said expensive places forgot how comfort was supposed to taste." Amara lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Ethan rarely spoke about his wife. In fact, most people in Chicago knew better than to mention her name at all. Yet tonight the memory slipped out of him before he could stop it. Across the room, Lily suddenly looked up toward her father. Then slowly, carefully, she shifted closer against Amara's side and whispered one more fragile word into the silence. "Warm." Ethan's breath caught completely. The fire crackled softly inside the stone fireplace while rain rolled down the enormous windows overlooking Lake Michigan like silver threads sliding through the night. Ethan Kong stood perfectly still near the mantel, staring at his daughter as if every small movement she made carried the weight of a miracle he was too afraid to touch. Lily sat curled beside Amara on the cream-colored sofa with a warm blanket around her shoulders and a mug of chamomile tea resting untouched in her lap. She had spoken twice in one night. 2 fragile words after 4 years of silence. Ethan still could not fully process it. Across from them, Amara carefully wrapped both hands around the oversized mug of hot chocolate one of the housekeepers had brought her minutes earlier. The warmth steadied her trembling fingers slightly, but nothing could calm the strange pressure building inside her chest. None of this felt real. She should have been back in her tiny apartment helping her brother finish homework at the kitchen table while the radiator clanged too loudly against the walls. Instead, she sat inside one of the most guarded homes in Chicago beside a little girl who looked at her with heartbreaking trust. Ethan finally broke the silence. Victor. The head of security stepped quietly into the room almost immediately. Yes, sir. Ethan never looked away from Lily. Run a full background check. Amara's stomach tightened instantly. Ethan continued calmly. Employment history. Financial records. Family. Everything. Victor nodded once. Understood. Amara slowly lowered her mug. I have not done anything wrong. Ethan's dark eyes lifted toward her at last. I did not say you did. Then why investigate me? The question escaped before she could stop it. The room became still again. Staff members nearby suddenly looked very interested in avoiding eye contact. Ethan Kong was not a man people challenged casually. But exhaustion had worn down Amara's fear hours ago. She had worked double shifts for 3 straight weeks. Slept 4 hours a night. Argued with insurance companies over her brother's heart medication. Tonight already felt too impossible to survive politely. Ethan studied her quietly. Most people either feared him or tried to impress him. Amara Brooks was doing neither. Because my daughter spoke to you, he answered finally. And I need to understand why. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Not suspicion. Not accusation. Fear. Real fear hidden beneath control sharpened by years of discipline. Amara glanced toward Lily, who had slowly fallen asleep against her shoulder beneath the soft firelight. The little girl looked younger while sleeping. Smaller. Fragile in a way that made Amara's chest ache unexpectedly. I think she was lonely, Amara said softly. Ethan's expression shifted almost invisibly. She has 24-hour staff. Tutors. Doctors. Therapists. That is not the same thing. Ethan fell silent. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a grandfather clock chimed midnight. The sound echoed softly through the enormous house. Amara looked around the sitting room again. Everything was beautiful. Perfectly arranged books. Fresh white orchids. Expensive art framed beneath warm lights. Yet despite the luxury, the mansion felt emotionally empty somehow. Like a museum preserving grief no one touched anymore. This house is very quiet, she whispered before thinking better of it. Ethan looked toward the fire. It used to be louder. The answer hung heavily between them. Amara did not ask about his wife. She could already feel her absence in every corner of the room. In the untouched piano near the windows. In the family photographs that stopped 4 years ago. In the way Ethan watched Lily like someone terrified of losing the last piece of his world. Victor quietly stepped back into the room holding a tablet. Sir, he said carefully. There is something you should probably see. Ethan took the device without a word. His eyes scanned the screen once. Then again slower. The temperature inside the room seemed to change instantly. Amara noticed his jaw tighten. What is it? She asked quietly. Ethan lifted his eyes toward her with an expression she could not read anymore. Your mother, he said slowly. Celeste Brooks. He paused. She worked for my family 22 years ago. The fire continued burning softly in the sitting room while Ethan Kong stared at the tablet in his hand as though the past itself had suddenly reached through the screen and grabbed him by the throat. Rain drifted against the towering windows overlooking Lake Michigan, but inside the mansion not a single person moved. Even the staff standing near the doorway seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. Amara slowly sat forward on the sofa, careful not to wake Lily sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "That is not possible," she said quietly. Ethan lifted his eyes toward her. "Your mother worked for my grandfather's estate in Seattle during the early 2000s. Victor stood beside him holding several digital records open across the screen. "Employment files confirm it," he added carefully. "Live-in domestic staff. 3 years." Amara blinked in disbelief. Her mother had died when she was 11 years old. Most of what she remembered now came in fragments. Warm hands brushing her hair before school. Cheap vanilla perfume. Old gospel music playing while cleaning tiny apartments. And always that lullaby. That same lullaby Lily responded to tonight. "My mother never talked about wealthy families," Amara whispered. "She barely talked about herself at all." Ethan lowered the tablet slowly. Something unsettled moved beneath his usually controlled expression now. "Did she ever mention the Kong family?" Amara shook her head. "No, sir." Ethan looked toward Lily sleeping soundly beside her. The little girl had not fallen asleep this peacefully around another person in years. Usually nights ended with panic attacks, trembling hands, and medication dissolved into warm water by exhausted caretakers. But tonight her breathing remained deep and calm against Amara's shoulder. Like she finally felt safe enough to rest. Ethan's chest tightened painfully at the sight. "There is more," Victor said quietly. Ethan glanced toward him. Victor hesitated for half a second before continuing. "Mrs. Brooks left the estate suddenly." Amara frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Victor looked uncomfortable now, which almost never happened. No official explanation was recorded. Ethan slowly reached for the tablet again and scrolled farther through the archived files. Then his movement stopped completely. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What?" Amara asked softly. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead he turned the tablet toward her. A faded photograph filled the screen. The image quality was old and grainy, but Amara recognized her mother instantly. Celeste Brooks stood outside a massive garden wearing a simple maid uniform while smiling softly at the camera. Beside her stood a Korean woman holding a little boy no older than 6. Amara's breath caught. Ethan looked at the photo in complete silence. Because the little boy in the picture was him. 22 years younger. Small enough to fit against his mother's side before power and grief hardened his face into something cold. "I remember her," Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. His voice sounded different now. Softer. Distant. "Your mother used to sing while she worked." Amara stared at him in disbelief. "You remember my mother?" Ethan nodded slowly while still looking at the photograph. "She worked in the East Garden every morning." A faint shadow of memory crossed his face. "My mother liked her because she was kind to everyone." The room fell silent again except for the sound of rain tapping against the glass. Then Ethan's expression shifted slightly. Something darker moved beneath the memory. "But one day she disappeared." Amara looked up immediately. "Disappeared?" Ethan nodded once. "No warning. No goodbye. My grandfather fired several staff members after that." Victor glanced carefully toward Ethan before speaking. "There were rumors at the time." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Rumors do not matter." But Victor hesitated again. "Sir, the reports mentioned your father." The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. Ethan slowly looked toward Victor with eyes that turned cold enough to silence everyone present. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep against Amara's shoulder. And for the first time all night, Amara felt genuine fear settle quietly into her chest. The silence after Victor's words felt heavier than the storm outside. Rain rolled against the towering windows while the fire crackled low inside the sitting room, but none of it softened the sudden tension filling the mansion. Ethan Kong stood motionless near the fireplace with the tablet still in his hand, his dark eyes unreadable again. The brief warmth that surfaced while remembering Celeste Brooks vanished completely. Now his expression looked carved from stone. "Leave us," Ethan said quietly. Victor nodded immediately and stepped back toward the doorway along with the remaining staff. Within seconds the enormous room emptied, leaving only Ethan, Amara, and the sleeping child curled against her side beneath the blanket. Amara swallowed carefully. "What did he mean about your father?" Ethan did not answer at first. Instead he walked slowly toward the windows overlooking Lake Michigan, one hand sliding into the pocket of his tailored black slacks while city lights shimmered across the water below. "My father liked control," he said finally. His voice remained calm, but something cold moved beneath it. "Especially over people who depended on him." Amara's chest tightened quietly. Ethan continued staring out at the rain. "The staff feared him." A long silence followed. "Including your mother." Amara lowered her eyes toward the sleeping girl beside her. Suddenly memories she had not touched in years began surfacing through the fog of childhood. Her mother locking apartment doors twice before bed. Jumping whenever unknown cars slowed near the building. Working endless jobs while refusing to explain why they moved so often after leaving Seattle. At the time Amara thought it was poverty. Now she was not so sure anymore. "My mother never talked about Seattle after we left," she whispered. Ethan nodded once without turning around. That probably was not an accident. The answer settled heavily between them. Amara looked again at the faded photograph still glowing softly on the tablet beside Ethan. Her mother smiling beside a little Korean boy who eventually became one of the most feared men in Chicago. Life suddenly felt far stranger than she could process. "Did your father hurt her?" she asked carefully. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "I do not know." But the way he said it made clear he had wondered the same thing before. Across the room Lily stirred softly in her sleep, pulling the blanket closer beneath her chin. Almost immediately Amara adjusted it gently around her shoulders without thinking. Ethan noticed the movement instantly. He had watched nurses, therapists, teachers, and caretakers cycle through this mansion for years. Most treated Lily like a fragile assignment. Amara touched her like family. The difference unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "You should rest upstairs tonight," Ethan said suddenly. Amara looked up quickly. "Absolutely not." Ethan turned toward her at last. "It is nearly 1 in the morning. I still need to get home to my brother. Victor already sent groceries and medication to your apartment." "That does not mean I abandon him." Ethan stared at her for a moment before something shifted slightly behind his eyes again. "Respect perhaps. Or recognition. How long have you been taking care of him alone?" Amara hesitated. "Since I was 19. Ethan looked toward Lily sleeping peacefully beside her. "That is young to become someone's entire world." The words landed deeper than he intended. Because he understood that kind of responsibility better than anyone. For years ago, after his wife's death, he became father and mother at the same time while drowning in grief he never learned how to survive properly. Yet unlike Amara, Ethan built walls around pain instead of warmth. And somewhere along the way, his daughter disappeared behind silence. Lily suddenly shifted again beneath the blanket. Slowly, her tiny fingers reached outward searching through sleep until they found Amara's hand once more. The little girl relaxed instantly after touching her. Ethan stared at that simple movement for a long time. Then quietly, almost like a confession spoken only to himself, he said, "She has not slept peacefully like this since her mother died." By 2 o'clock in the morning, the storm outside had softened into steady rain drifting across the dark shoreline of Lake Michigan while the Kong mansion remained wrapped in unusual quiet. Most nights the house felt cold after midnight, more like a luxury hotel than a home, but tonight something had changed. The sitting room lights glowed softer somehow. The fire burned lower. And for the first time in years, Lily Kong slept peacefully without medication waiting beside her bed. Ethan stood alone near the windows holding a glass of untouched bourbon while watching Amara carefully lift Lily into her arms. The little girl barely stirred as Amara carried her gently toward the staircase leading upstairs. Ethan followed several steps behind in silence. Every movement felt strangely fragile tonight, as though one wrong word could shatter whatever miracle had entered his house. Amara reached the second floor and paused uncertainly beneath a long hallway lined with framed family photographs. Most of them were old. Ethan and his wife smiling beside ocean cliffs in California. A toddler-aged Lily asleep on her mother's chest. Summer vacations before grief hollowed the mansion into silence. Amara stopped briefly at one photograph near the staircase. Ethan noticed immediately. In the picture, his late wife Sophia sat in a garden laughing while holding a tiny lily beneath blooming cherry blossoms. She was beautiful, Amara whispered softly. Ethan looked at the photograph for several seconds before answering. She made every room feel warmer. The honesty in his voice surprised even him. He rarely spoke about Sophia aloud anymore because memories hurt less when buried beneath work and control. But tonight everything connected to her seemed closer somehow. Especially with that lullaby still echoing inside his head. Ethan opened the door to Lily's bedroom quietly. The room beyond looked less like a child's space and more like a carefully preserved memory. Pale pink curtains framed massive windows overlooking the lake. Shelves overflowed with untouched books and stuffed animals arranged too perfectly to have been played with recently. Moonlight spilled softly across a white canopy bed large enough for a princess in an old storybook. Amara carefully laid Lily beneath the blankets, but the little girl immediately stirred in panic the moment her hand slipped away. "It is okay," Amara whispered gently while kneeling beside the bed. "I am still here." Lily's breathing steadied almost instantly. Ethan watched the exchange from the doorway, his chest tightening again with emotions he no longer knew how to control properly. "How are you doing that?" he asked quietly. Amara glanced back toward him. "Doing what?" "Getting her to trust you." Amara looked down at Lily for a moment before answering. Children know when someone sees them as a person instead of a problem. Ethan fell silent. The words landed harder than she realized. For years every conversation around Lily revolved around treatment plans, symptoms, medications, specialists, schedules. Somewhere along the way Ethan forgot his daughter was more than grief wrapped inside silence. Amara gently brushed loose hair away from Lily's forehead. "My brother stopped talking for almost a year after our mother died," she admitted softly. Ethan looked at her immediately. "What happened?" "He was 7. Her voice lowered slightly. "One day he just decided the world hurt too much to speak to anymore." Ethan slowly stepped farther into the room. "And what helped him?" Amara smiled faintly without taking her eyes off Lily. "Nothing fancy." She shrugged softly. "Consistency. Patience. Sitting beside him even when he ignored me." Ethan stared at her quietly beneath the dim bedroom light. She spoke about pain without bitterness. About sacrifice without asking for sympathy. And somehow that unsettled him more than anger ever could. Lily suddenly shifted beneath the blankets and reached sleepily toward Amara again. Without hesitation, Amara sat carefully beside the bed and let the little girl hold her hand. Ethan watched his daughter relax instantly. Then slowly, almost like a realization arriving too late, he understood something terrifying. Lily was not responding to money. Or doctors. Or expertise. She was responding to love. And love was the one thing Ethan Kong no longer knew how to give without fear. Morning arrived slowly over Lake Michigan, washing pale silver light across the massive windows of the Kong mansion while the storm finally disappeared into distant clouds. Usually the house woke in silence. Staff moved quietly through marble hallways. Security rotated shifts without conversation. And somewhere behind closed doors, Lily Kong spent another day trapped inside the quiet world grief built around her. But today something felt different from the moment the sun touched the lake. Ethan stood alone outside Lily's bedroom holding a cup of untouched coffee while listening carefully through the half-open door. Soft laughter drifted into the hallway. Real laughter. Small and breathy, but unmistakably alive. Ethan froze completely. Inside the room, Amara sat cross-legged on the carpet beside Lily with children's books scattered around them. Sometime during the night, one of the housekeepers must have brought the books down from the shelves untouched for years. Now Lily slowly turned pages while Amara made exaggerated voices for each animal character in the story. And then the little fox said, Amara whispered dramatically, "That is definitely not my sandwich." Lily's shoulders shook with another tiny laugh before she quickly covered her mouth in surprise, almost like she forgot she could still make sounds. Ethan's grip tightened around the coffee cup. He had not heard that sound since Sophia was alive. For a moment he simply stood there watching unnoticed from the hallway while sunlight spilled softly across the room. Lily looked brighter somehow this morning. Awake. Present. Human again instead of distant. Amara noticed Ethan first and immediately began standing up. "Sorry," she said softly. "I did not mean to stay this late." But before she could fully rise, Lily grabbed the sleeve of her sweater again. Ethan noticed the panic flicker instantly across his daughter's face at the idea of Amara leaving. "It is fine," he said quietly. Amara hesitated. "Sir, I still need to get to work." Ethan stepped into the room slowly, his eyes never leaving Lily. "You are not going back to the restaurant." Amara blinked in confusion. "What?" "Hanseong Lounge already received compensation for your remaining schedule." "You paid my boss?" "Yes." Her expression tightened immediately. "You cannot make decisions about my life without asking me." Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the resistance. Most people accepted his money before he even finished speaking. But Amara stared back at him with exhausted frustration instead of gratitude. "I have bills," she continued quietly. "A brother depending on me. I cannot just disappear into somebody else's mansion because things got emotional for one night." Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. Lily slowly climbed off the bed, walked across the room with hesitant little steps, and wrapped both arms tightly around Amara's waist. The entire room froze. Ethan felt his heartbeat stop completely. Lily had not initiated physical affection with anyone since the funeral. Not with therapists. Not with caretakers. Not even with him. Yet now she clung to Amara with trembling desperation while hiding her face against her sweater. Amara looked stunned too. Very carefully, she lowered one hand to Lily's hair. "Hey," she whispered softly. "It is okay." Lily shook her head against her. Her tiny voice came out broken and fragile from disuse. "Stay." Ethan looked away for one brief second because the sight hurt too much to watch directly. Hope had become dangerous inside this house. Every small improvement over the years eventually collapsed back into silence. But this felt different. Real. Alive. And that terrified him more than failure ever had. Amara slowly knelt in front of Lily until they were eye level. "Sweetheart," she whispered gently, "I cannot stay forever." Lily's eyes filled with panic immediately. Ethan saw a building before anyone else did. Her breathing quickened. Tiny hands trembled. The same fear that usually ended in complete emotional shutdown. But before it could spiral, Amara softly touched Lily's cheeks and began humming that familiar lullaby again beneath the warm morning light. Almost instantly Lily's breathing steadied. Ethan stared at them in complete silence. Then quietly, almost like a realization finally reaching him too late, he understood something that shook him deeply. His daughter was not healing because Amara reminded her of the past. She was healing because for the first time since losing her mother, someone was teaching Lily what safety felt like again. By late afternoon, sunlight stretched across the Kong estate in long bands of gold while the mansion slowly adjusted around a presence no one expected to matter so much. Staff members who once moved through the hallways with robotic silence now paused quietly outside rooms just to listen for Lily's voice. It never came loudly. Sometimes it was only a whisper. A single word. A soft laugh. But inside this house, even the smallest sound felt miraculous. Amara sat at the kitchen island helping Lily decorate sugar cookies while flour dusted the sleeves of her sweater and sunlight warmed the enormous marble counters. The kitchen staff watched discreetly from a distance, pretending to focus on dinner preparations while secretly staring in disbelief at the child beside her. Lily had spent 4 years refusing eye contact with strangers. Now she followed Amara through the mansion like a shadow searching for light. Ethan entered the kitchen quietly, removing his suit jacket after returning from meetings downtown. Normally his presence alone changed the atmosphere of every room instantly. Conversation stopped. People straightened. Fear settled in quietly. But today something unusual happened. Lily looked up from the cookies and smiled. Not a full smile. Small. Careful. But real. Ethan froze in the doorway. His chest tightened painfully again. Amara noticed immediately and gently looked away, almost as if giving him privacy inside his own emotion. Ethan slowly approached the island. "What are those supposed to be?" he asked softly. Lily glanced down at the crooked cookie shapes before answering in a tiny voice. "Stars." Ethan looked at the badly shaped dough covered in too much blue icing. For the first time in years, he found himself wanting to laugh without forcing it. "They look expensive," he said quietly. Lily let out another tiny breath of laughter. The sound hit Ethan harder than any threat ever could. Before he could respond again, the peaceful moment shattered beneath the sharp sound of high heels approaching through the hallway. Several staff members immediately stiffened. Victor appeared near the kitchen entrance with visible concern. "Sir," he said carefully, "Miss Whitmore arrived unexpectedly." Ethan's entire expression hardened instantly. Seconds later Claire Whitmore entered the kitchen wearing an ivory designer coat and heels sharp enough to sound like judgment against the marble floor. Tall, elegant, and perfectly polished, Claire looked like the kind of woman magazine covers described as untouchable. But her smile disappeared the moment she saw Amara standing beside Lily. "What is this?" she asked slowly. The warmth vanished from the room. Immediately. Ethan's voice turned cold again. "You were not invited." Claire ignored him completely while studying Amara with thinly hidden disgust. "I heard rumors from the investors this morning, but I assumed they were exaggerating." Her eyes swept over Amara's flour-covered sweater and tired sneakers. "You brought a waitress into the house?" Amara immediately stepped back slightly. "I should probably leave." But Lily grabbed her hand before she could move. Claire noticed the gesture instantly. Her expression sharpened. "Ethan, this is exactly why people are talking." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Enough." But Claire continued anyway, her voice lowering into something poisonous wrapped in elegance. "Your daughter is vulnerable. And now some random woman walks into your life and suddenly everybody acts like she is family?" The kitchen fell silent. Staff members lowered their eyes immediately. Amara felt humiliation crawl slowly up her neck, but she kept her voice calm. "I never asked to be here." Claire laughed softly without warmth. "Of course not. Women like you never ask directly." Ethan's eyes darkened instantly. "Claire. One warning. Quiet. Dangerous." But Claire had already crossed too far to stop now. She stepped closer toward Amara with a tight smile. "Do you honestly think you belong in this house?" The room froze completely. Ethan took one slow step forward. But before he could speak, Lily suddenly moved in front of Amara with trembling shoulders and tear-filled eyes. Her tiny body shook violently while panic and fear crashed across her face all at once. Then for the first time in years, the little girl raised her voice loud enough for the entire mansion to hear. "Do not be mean to her." Silence slammed across the kitchen. The silence after Lily shouted felt almost unreal inside the enormous kitchen. Every staff member stood frozen beside marble counters and copper cookware while the little girl trembled in front of Amara with tears running down her cheeks. Her small chest rose quickly beneath her pale sweater, but she did not back away this time. For 4 years Lily Kong hid from every difficult emotion by disappearing into silence. But now she stood there shaking with fear and still chose to protect someone else. Ethan stared at his daughter in complete shock. Claire looked equally stunned. "Lily," she whispered carefully, as if afraid sudden movement might break the moment. But the little girl only moved closer against Amara's side. Ethan slowly stepped forward. The warmth that returned to his life over the last 24 hours vanished beneath something colder now. Sharper. More dangerous. "You will apologize," he said quietly to Claire. The room immediately changed. Everyone in the kitchen understood that tone. Claire straightened slightly, disbelief flashing across her face. "Excuse me?" Ethan's eyes never left hers. "You humiliated a guest in my home. In front of my daughter." Claire let out a short laugh filled with frustration rather than humor. "Ethan, this is insane. You barely know this woman. And yet she has shown Lily more kindness in one day than most people in this house have managed in years." The words landed hard enough to silence everyone completely. Claire's face tightened instantly. "So now I am the villain because I questioned some waitress suddenly living here?" Amara quietly stepped backward. "I really do not want problems between anybody." But Ethan lifted one hand slightly without looking at her. A silent instruction to stay where she was. Claire noticed it immediately. Her expression darkened further. "You are choosing her over me?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "I am choosing my daughter." The quiet certainty in his voice hit harder than shouting ever could. Claire stared at him for several long seconds as though realizing she no longer understood the man standing in front of her. For years Ethan Kong had remained emotionally untouchable. Cold. Controlled. Loyal to routine and business above everything else. Even their engagement had often felt more strategic than romantic. But now he stood protectively beside a frightened child and a tired waitress with flour on her sleeves like nothing else in the world mattered more. Claire lowered her voice sharply. "You are letting emotion cloud your judgment." Ethan finally stepped closer. Not aggressive. Not loud. Somehow that made him more intimidating. "No," he said calmly. "For the first time in 4 years, my judgment is clear." Claire looked around the kitchen, suddenly aware that every staff member had witnessed this entire moment. Humiliation flickered across her face before she turned toward Amara with visible bitterness. "Congratulations," she said coldly. "You certainly found a way into this family quickly." Amara's expression fell immediately. "That is not fair." "Enough," Ethan said sharply. Claire looked back at him one final time. "If she stays here, people will talk." Ethan's face became unreadable again. "Let them." The simplicity of the answer stunned the room into silence once more. Because everyone knew exactly what Ethan Kong meant when he stopped caring about public opinion. Claire slowly picked up her designer handbag from the counter, her hands noticeably tighter now. "You are making a mistake," she whispered. Ethan did not respond immediately. Instead he looked toward Lily, who still held tightly onto Amara's hand while trying to steady her breathing. Then his eyes returned to Claire with terrifying calm. "The mistake," he said quietly, "would be allowing anyone to hurt my daughter again while I stand there pretending not to see it." Claire froze completely. Ethan stepped aside toward the doorway. A silent dismissal. For several seconds she did not move. Then finally she walked out of the kitchen without another word, her heels echoing sharply through the hallway until silence swallowed the sound completely. Ethan remained standing still long after she disappeared. Across the kitchen, Lily slowly looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. Then in a tiny trembling voice that nearly broke him apart, she whispered, "Papa stayed." Ethan closed his eyes for one brief second because he suddenly realized something painful. His daughter had spent years believing people always left. That night the Kong mansion felt different in a way nobody could explain aloud. Staff members spoke softer. Hallways once heavy with silence now carried the faint sound of Lily's voice drifting occasionally from upstairs like something fragile returning to life one breath at a time. Even the air inside the house seemed warmer after what happened in the kitchen. Ethan stood alone in his private office overlooking the lake while Chicago glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like distant fire beneath the night sky. His untouched bourbon rested beside stacks of contracts and financial reports he no longer had the energy to read. Normally work silenced everything inside him. Numbers were easier than grief. Power was easier than love. But tonight his daughter's tiny voice kept replaying in his head. Papa stayed. For simple words. Yet they exposed something Ethan spent years refusing to face. Lily had not only lost her mother. She had slowly lost him too. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Victor stepped inside carrying a thin folder. "You asked for the old Seattle files," he said quietly. Ethan nodded once and took the folder without speaking. The documents inside smelled faintly of old paper and dust. Employment records. Archived photographs. Security reports from his grandfather's estate over 20 years ago. Ethan flipped through the pages slowly until one photograph stopped him completely. Sophia. His late wife stood smiling beside Celeste Brooks in the estate garden years before Ethan ever met her. Both women looked young. Happy. Comfortable together. Ethan stared at the image in disbelief. Why was this never mentioned before? Victor hesitated carefully. Most records connected to your father disappeared after his death. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Not all of them apparently. Victor remained silent. Ethan continued staring at the photograph while memories surfaced slowly through the fog of years. Sophia used to speak often about a woman from Seattle who taught her how kindness mattered more than status. A woman who believed children could sense loneliness adults tried to hide. At the time Ethan never paid much attention. Now his chest tightened painfully with realization. Celeste Brooks had known Sophia long before he did. Which meant Amara's presence in this house tonight was not random at all. Somewhere downstairs, faint laughter echoed briefly through the hallway. Ethan froze instantly. Lily. He had spent years forgetting what joy sounded like inside these walls. Without thinking, he left the office and followed the sound downstairs. He found Amara sitting on the living room floor beside Lily beneath a blanket fort built from expensive couch cushions and dining chairs. The sight alone felt surreal. One of the most powerful men in Chicago stood silently in a $1,000 suit watching his daughter hide inside a blanket fort with a waitress who accidentally brought life back into his home. Lily looked up first. "Papa," she whispered softly. Ethan's throat tightened immediately. Every time she spoke now felt like hearing sunlight after years underground. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Lily glanced proudly toward the fort. "Castle." Amara smiled faintly beside her. "Apparently I was hired as royal architect tonight." Ethan stared at them for a long moment before something unexpected happened. Lily lifted one side of the blanket entrance and looked directly at him. "Come in." Ethan blinked once in surprise. He had negotiated with billionaires without fear. Faced men powerful enough to destroy companies with one phone call. Yet standing there beside a child's blanket fort suddenly felt impossible. Because this required something far more dangerous than power. Vulnerability. Amara noticed the hesitation in his eyes immediately. "It is okay," she said softly. "The castle has room for one more." Ethan slowly lowered himself onto the carpet beside them, awkward in a way nobody in Chicago would ever believe possible. Lily immediately curled against his side beneath the blanket fort while Amara adjusted the flashlight glowing between them like campfire light. For several quiet minutes nobody spoke. Rain tapped softly against the distant windows while the mansion settled peacefully around them. Then Lily looked sleepily between Ethan and Amara before whispering the words that stopped both their hearts at the exact same time. Mama used to laugh like this too. The blanket fort remained glowing softly beneath the flashlight while rain whispered against the windows of the Kong mansion and the city lights shimmered quietly across Lake Michigan beyond the glass. After Lily's sleepy words about her mother, silence settled around the three of them in a way that no longer felt heavy. Ethan sat motionless beside his daughter while emotions he had buried for years slowly rose to the surface one by one. Grief. Regret. Love. Fear. He had spent so long trying to protect Lily from pain that he never realized she had been waiting for someone to simply sit beside her inside it. Amara looked down gently, giving Ethan space to breathe through the moment without forcing conversation. That alone made him trust her more. Most people rushed to fill silence because silence made them uncomfortable. But Amara understood quiet grief. She knew how to sit beside broken hearts without demanding they heal faster. Lily slowly drifted asleep between them beneath the blanket fort, one tiny hand wrapped around Ethan's fingers while the other rested against Amara's sleeve. For the first time in years, Ethan did not feel like a man losing his daughter piece by piece. He felt like a father finally finding his way back to her. Hours later, after Lily had been carefully carried upstairs to bed, Ethan stood alone in the kitchen while Amara prepared to leave. The mansion had grown still again, but now it felt peaceful instead of empty. Amara slipped on her coat near the doorway while soft yellow light spilled across the marble floor around them. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly. Amara looked surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You do not owe me gratitude." Ethan gave the faintest shake of his head. "You brought sound back into this house." The honesty in the words settled deeply between them. Amara lowered her eyes for a moment before smiling softly. She was already in there. She just needed someone to make it feel safe to come back out. Ethan looked at her carefully then, seeing not a waitress, not a stranger, but a woman who carried kindness the way other people carried status or money. Quietly. Naturally. Without asking for recognition. Sophia used to say something similar, he admitted softly. She believed wounded people healed through warmth, not pressure. Amara smiled faintly. Your wife sounded wise. Ethan glanced upstairs toward Lily's bedroom. She was. A black sedan waited outside to drive Amara home, its headlights glowing softly through the rain-streaked driveway. But before she stepped out the front door, Ethan spoke again. You do not have to return to the restaurant. Amara turned slowly toward him. Ethan continued carefully this time, without control or command in his voice. Lily trusts you. And I think, he paused briefly, unfamiliar with vulnerability. I think she needs you here. Amara looked toward the staircase where Lily slept peacefully for the first time in years. I cannot promise forever, she whispered. Ethan nodded once. Neither can I. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Amara gave him a small tired smile before stepping into the night. Ethan stood beneath the doorway watching the sedan disappear through the gates while rain drifted softly across the estate. Upstairs, Lily slept without nightmares. Downstairs, the mansion no longer felt haunted by silence. And somewhere deep inside a man who built his entire life around control, something gentler had finally begun to return. Not because of power. Not because of fear. But because one exhausted waitress looked at a grieving child and chose kindness first. Weeks later, staff members would still talk quietly about the night Lily Kong spoke again. Investors would whisper about the mysterious woman who changed the atmosphere of Ethan Kang's entire world without ever asking for anything in return. But inside the mansion itself, the truth felt much simpler than rumors. A lonely child needed warmth. A grieving father needed hope. And a woman who spent her whole life unnoticed reminded them both what love sounded like when it returned softly instead of loudly. The city lights shimmered peacefully beyond the windows while laughter slowly found its way back into the Kong home one small moment at a time. And that night, the world quietly remembered what dignity, kindness, and healing truly looked like. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can discover stories that remind us all that even the coldest hearts can still find their way home.